Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to the Gegenpressing podcast. My name is Stefan Binkowski. As ever, I'm joined by Manu Vet. Manu, how's it going?
It's going all right. Well, we're doing this bright and early. Apparently you have stuff to do, which is fair enough. It is your day off.
Yeah. Bright and early for you. It's coming up for 5 p.m. for me, which is why I have stuff to do. But that's just the kind of nature of our global podcasting operations. But we have someone in a third time zone just to keep things complicated. As ever, we're joined by Matt Ford in Germany. Matt, how's it going?
Yeah, good evening, good morning, good day, wherever we are. Getting on to for 6 o'clock here. So yeah, all three time zones covered.
Yeah, it's quite funny. We do have like a large section of our listeners and subscribers are from America, and you can actually tell when the US is beginning to wake up because we get this kind of wave of likes and comments and things on the articles around like 3 or 4 p.m. my time. And then Manu obviously pops up and says, "Hey, how's it going?" So it's a funny, it's a funny kind of way of doing things, but we love it all the same. And yeah, Manu, I guess we should probably just jump straight into this. I know we usually have a little preamble, but we had Matt again this weekend, so we'll probably just jump straight into it and talk about all sorts of things right after this break.
Yeah, let's get the bills paid first. It's a Texas showdown in the postseason, and BetOnline is your number one source for all your baseball wagering info, with up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals for the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistic, news, and odds. You have everything you need to stay up to speed on each LCS all the way through the World Series. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Don't forget to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. I feel sorry for you guys having to listen to all these code words.
It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I just zone out anyway, so it's totally fine. And talking about zoning out, we're deciding not to talk about the big teams this week because I took in Dortmund's 1-0 win over Werder Bremen. I did my absolute best to stay awake throughout the match. So
no, that's not true. We're talking Bayern.
We're talking Bayern, but only because we want to talk about Mainz, really. And, I think we kind of discussed the topics we wanted to bring up this week, and it feels like there's a lot more going on at the bottom of the table maybe than at the top of the table right now. Obviously, the top 5 teams all won this weekend, all relatively comprehensively. I know Dortmund only won 1-0, but it was a pretty one-sided affair. Stuttgart as well, Leipzig, etc., etc. So,
although, Stefan, before we do anything else, I know we have to keep this tight, but we do need to mention that Brandt scored in his 300th Bundesliga game.
Yeah, I was also going to point that out. It is worth mentioning Brandt. He's been really, really good all season and done a really, really neat little finish. So, and
300 is such a massive milestone, right?
Yeah. The only reason I haven't made a point of that is because I've made a point in it in my newsletter this week.
That's fair.
I was trying to kind of keep my powder dry until that's published tomorrow morning. But you're absolutely right. He now has 131 goals and assists. 300 Bundesliga games. Only 6 players have bagged more goals and assists in that time. And if you want to find out more, you can of course read my newsletter, which kind of goes through the evolution of Julian Brandt as a player and how he has kind of developed into this kind of star for Dortmund, which I think probably wasn't a foregone conclusion by any means when he joined the club in the kind of years that followed under Lucien Favre and things like that. But, putting that to one side, we do want to kind of talk about some of the other teams because it was a weekend which saw Cologne pick up a big win. It was a weekend that saw Augsburg pick up a big win. And Matt, maybe unfair to kind of throw these two teams together into one discussion, and we have talked about both actually on recent weeks, but what did you make of both of those results, both of those teams, and where the clubs are right now?
Both teams ultimately stepping up with really, really important wins at really key junctures. Obviously, it's first one in the case of Augsburg under the new coach. Are we saying Jess? Is it Thorup or Torup? I think I'm probably going to go for the hard T. I think is that fair?
Torup, isn't it?
Yes, Torup. Who I am not going to claim to know a great deal about. However, he certainly cuts a smart figure in a very nice suit on the touchline. And at least after Augsburg had gone 2-0 down, they actually pulled off quite an offensive spectacular in the end. So we just see where they go from there. I don't think Augsburg have too much to worry about going forward. They've already shown this season that they can score goals. Obviously, they're that far draw on match day one against Borussia Mönchengladbach. They do have issues at the back. I think they have a league record or a league high of goals conceded from set pieces, and that continued in Heidenheim. But yeah, even if it is against one of the apparent minnows of the league in Heidenheim, any team that goes 2-0 down away from home but then comes back and wins 5-2 on a Sunday night, I think is worthy of praise. So yeah, good win at a good juncture for Augsburg under an interesting new coach. And as for Cologne, their key juncture being that it was the derby, and arguably the biggest derby that's left in the Bundesliga. I think that's probably fair to say. Neither team really went into it in great form. I think Gladbach had probably been coming. Things seemed to be coming together slightly in the games leading up. And I think, as we said in the big podcast we did with the focus on Cologne a couple of weeks ago, they've actually been nowhere near as bad, despite the limitations. They have been nowhere near as bad as results would suggest. And I thought it was interesting the interview that Stefan Baumgart did with DAZN after the 3-1 win, where he actually seemed quite. I'm not sure if he had a cold or if he actually seemed really emotional, but he actually he seemed audibly to maybe be fighting back tears a little bit. Maybe he actually just had a cold and his voice just sounded a bit wobbly.
Doesn't he always sound like that though?
Yeah, he does have quite a croaky voice, doesn't he? But what was he said? He said, in Köln sieht man kein Gebolze. So we don't just boot the ball around aimlessly in Cologne. Like you're not going to come here and just see nonsense. Which, okay, he's been very, very kind to his team, but it is fair to say they've not been that bad all season. And the performance, particularly in the first half against Gladbach, was really, really good. Admittedly, two of the main goals, two of the first goals from Kites came from pens. The second one was retaken, so they had some fortune in that sense. Really good finish from Luca Waldschmidt to finish it off. And I think, as bad as Gladbach were, a really deserved derby win from Cologne, and probably deserved as well after 8 performances which have not been as bad as the league table would suggest.
Yeah, Manu, I feel like I set myself up for embarrassment here because in our preview show, not only did I pick Heidenheim to beat Augsburg, but I also picked Gladbach to beat Cologne, more or less based on the premise that Coney coming back into this team should have shored up this Gladbach defence, which seems to do anything but. But also, kind of maybe paradoxically, we have been talking about Augsburg recently, and I think I said when they sacked the head coach and brought in the new one that, you know, if you look at Augsburg's underlying numbers, and as Matt says, Cologne's underlying numbers too, probably, these are two teams who probably were due to bounce back at some point. What do you think about that, Manu?
Well, we both had that prediction, so you're not alone.
It's also worth pointing out here, by the way, just to jump in, if you actually look at the XG for the game, Heidenheim's was 3.13 and Augsburg's was 3.29. And I think you can probably see a couple of those Augsburg goals were very fortunate. I think the first one was just a free header in the corner, and then I think Pedersen's maybe volley with outside the foot, if I'm not mistaken, it was just a bit of a screamer. So that misfortune that has plagued Augsburg just seemed to flip on its head in this game, it felt like.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the new manager bounce as well. I think that is a big part of this for Augsburg, right? The first performance, and then maybe we should have guessed that Augsburg wins that game with a new manager in charge. The players who haven't had a chance previously, they always kind of seem to bounce back. Whereas with I wrote the big preview on the Rhine Derby, right? Sort of reminiscent of how it was once one of the big derbies in German football, and it still is, in many ways. But this season, it just kind of felt, felt like it was two teams just in terrible form that were going against each other, and Köln desperately needed this result. I find it interesting, Matt, that Baumgart was speaking to DAZN, who were the broadcaster in Germany, and yet completely refused to show that game in Canada, even though they're the broadcaster here as well. It seems
is that right? Okay.
Yeah, it seems like if you have your cameras and everything here, and you have the rights, and the game is produced for you, just put it on. Especially if it's one of the most historical games of the league that you cover. And I needed to get this off my chest because it's absolutely atrocious the way they have to handle the league this year in Canada. But you know what?
It's a shame to hear that because, like you said, obviously it is a massively historical fixtures, all sorts of storylines and narratives behind that game.
Yeah.
And as much as you both rightly say that there wasn't necessarily great massive sporting interest coming in, it was two of the poorest performing teams in terms of point tallies anyway in the league. No really spectacular names on show. But
on top of that, Matt, Köln is actually.
You saw the spectacle before the game. I mean, the fans certainly take it extremely seriously, and I mean that was a pretty spectacular fireworks show from the Cologne fans before kick-off. I think it was delayed 5 minutes, wasn't it, because of all the smoke? So and also interesting to see before kick-off the Cologne players gathered in front of the terrace after the warm-up, having a talking to by the ultras, telling them to, I suppose, pull their fingers out and win.
Well, the thing is too, in North America, both those teams are actually quite popular because when football or soccer first arrived here in the 70s, the Bundesliga was actually one of the few leagues that actually had a show, right? And who were the two big teams in the 70s? Well, Gladbach and Köln, right?
Yeah.
So, and I wrote this in my preview, 77, Gladbach won the title. 78, Gladbach won the title, Köln won at 79, ahead of Gladbach on goal differential, right? So this is a fixture steeped in history, but actually one that's actually quite popular here as well, which makes it even more baffling that you wouldn't show it. But you're quite right. I mean, the scenes before the game, and it sets it up so on, and I think that is also kind of underlines how massive this game is in this region, and these teams and these are so closely together, right, in geographic proximity. You can literally take public transport from one to the other. The S-Bahn connects Gladbach to Köln, for example, right? Which is like the equivalent of the Overground in London or the SkyTrain in Vancouver, or wherever you are. It's like you can take not just a real train, but you can just take like a public transport there. And with all that in mind, I wrote in my preview that for Köln, if they don't win this one, they would be in real trouble. Real trouble, right? Just 1 point so far. And those 3 points against your biggest rival, I think that could be a real turning point. And I think that explains why Baumgart was so emotional.
Yeah, I think he also he's hinted at the idea that a lot of the press around Cologne, and it is one of the most intense press environments in Germany, bizarrely enough. I mean, obviously Munich and the press, the media landscape surrounding Bayern. Hamburg is quite notorious for the landscape surrounding HSV. But the landscape in Cologne surrounding FC is for the relative status of the club and how relatively little they've achieved in the past, this century. The euphoria and the intensity around the club can be quite extreme at times. And Baumgart seemed quite protective. I said and not just him, but also the head of the professional football division. I forget the name. Is it not Keller? The former goalkeeper. name.
I thought it was Keller.
It might be the former backup goalkeeper. Either way, he was also saying that we've been criticised. This squad has apparently been criticised in the press for not being good enough, not having the quality. But he emphasised that we believe in it and we put it together for a reason and we believe in it. And okay, maybe he has to say that, but it also suggests that there are some feelings within the club at Cologne that maybe they feel a bit hard done by I suppose people like us slagging him off on podcasts. So fair play to Cologne, and good luck to him.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the media, putting expectations.
Kessler, I believe. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
To be fair to the media, putting pressure on the club to perform better, you only have to speak to someone from Cologne for 5 minutes to get the impression that they also think their city should be the best one in the world. So it's something
that is also true.
It's not. It's something. People from Cologne are probably the proudest, I think, in Germany outside of Munich. I would probably argue, as far as I can tell.
Well, Munich is the best city in the world.
Well, there we go. Point proven.
And so, what's the next game we're talking about?
Yeah, talking about cities with huge expectations on themselves to one that's maybe a little less serious about things, shall we say? I don't know if that's a huge cliche, but let's go to the capital, because that result for both Cologne and Augsburg really kind of shakes things up at the bottom of the table. Augsburg, I think, leapfrogged like 5 teams or something like that. Cologne, I think, came off the bottom of the table. And one of the teams who continue to kind of fall, like a rock really, are Union Berlin, who, of course, lost 3-0 to Stuttgart. This game, to me, I think it summed up Union quite well in the way that they've just completely kind of fell apart this season. I honestly spent about a good hour and a half, 2 hours just digging through stats this afternoon to try and get to the bottom of what's going on with Union, because a lot of people bring up this whole XG thing from last season, which may be worth explaining, just because we did have a subscriber ask last week what the XG myth was, and he may have missed it. But essentially last season, Union outperformed their XG. I think by the end of the season, their XG was 10 goals fewer than their actual goals. But it's worth bearing in mind that both Bayern and Dortmund's were also like 9, 9.5, 9.8. So, it's not entirely uncommon. But there's a lot of people who suggested that because they were outperforming their XG, eventually, that would come back down, the goals would dry up, performances or results would kind of falter, and hey presto, they would revert back to the mean. But I think if you actually kind of look at the stats that Union are kind of putting up this season, the 11 goals in 8 games isn't great, but I think what's far more concerning is the 17 they've conceded in 8 games. And one stat that really stood out to me this season is and it's a very niche stat, so bear with me guys, but if you look at which teams have conceded the most amount of crosses into their own 6-yard box, Union were maybe 4th or 5th best in the league last season. This season, they're dead last. So, they basically, and actually if you kind of look at the goals that they conceded against Stuttgart, the first goal comes from a dinked kind of cross to Girassi. The person who's making the pass, who I can't remember now, is standing about 20 feet in front of Robin Gosens, who's backed off, and he's in a kind of back 5. And this, the Stuttgart fullback, I think it is, has got plenty of space. He swings across into the box, Girassi taps it home with a header. The second goal from Silas is just an excellent counter-attack. He uses incredible pace, a really nice finish, and he scores, so that's fair enough. And then the third goal actually as well is also another cross from the right hand side, which is kind of drilled into the back post, and then Stuttgart make it 3 from an unmarked attacker. So if you think I also actually just went through every single goal they've conceded so far this season and kind of jotted down how they've conceded it, how it's happened. The thing that keeps coming up time and time again is, while they're not actually conceding directly from corners, they've already conceded about 5 or 6 goals this season where it's like the second play from a corner. So, for example, a corner gets cleared, and then the opposing player scores a volley on the edge of the box or something like that. So it feels to me like this team have completely forgotten how to defend. A large part of that, I think, is because Khedira's only just came back into that midfield. They've also got a number of new players in defence, particularly Bonucci, but I also think Gosens is a big factor there as well on the left-hand side. I don't know, Matt, I'll maybe throw this to you first, but I mean, what have you made of Union so far this season, and do you think this is something that Fischer can fix, or are we going to see a very dramatic kind of demise of this club?
It's a Texas showdown in the postseason, and BetOnline is your number one source for all your baseball wagering info, with up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals for the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistic, news, and odds. We have everything you need to stay up to speed on each LCS all the way through the World Series. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Don't forget to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
I think what you're hinting at there with like the getting winning second balls after set pieces and goals, conceding goals in that sense, it does all point to just a general couple of percentage points of drop off in general intensity, and you could see that in pretty much all three goals against Stuttgart this weekend. Obviously, you mentioned the cross into Girassi for the first header. I mean, both crosser and header of the ball are stood with absolutely yards and yards of space, and Sporting Director Oliver Brunet even pointed that out and criticised that afterwards as well. And yeah, similarly for the with the third goal, I mean, there is probably an element of having given up by that point in the 88th minute, but obviously give the ball away in the left back position, but there's no pressure to win it. Stuttgart are able to win back possession halfway up through Union's half so easy, and then the cross into Undav. He's also stood there completely unmarked. A general drop off in intensity, which is costing them defensively, and I think also difficult to quantify, but a lack of I suppose precision and clinicalness up front, because they did have chances against Stuttgart. Berlins 1-on-1 when I think it was in the second half when it was still 1-0. You've got the point. You got the chance that Fofana puts over the bar from a really good position. So I mean, if those two go in, suddenly Union are right back in the game. So yeah, missing those clinical percentage points both offensively and defensively, and it's costing them. Another thing that I wasn't actually aware of the extent of it, but I've sort of read it in Kicker this morning. Apparently they've made 19 changes to the starting 11 across the 8 games so far. That's an awful lot. That's a lot of changes to a team which, as we said in the bigger chat that we had about Union a few weeks ago, given that they've brought in a raft of players in Bonucci and Khedira and Folland and Gosens, who are perhaps not quite that typical Union signing, but they brought them in this year with added Champions League money, hoping to add a bit of extra, I suppose, experience and that extra bit of class to the squad. Those sort of newcomers with a new mentality, different approach, combined with the 19 changes, it just all speaks a language which is very, very inconsistent, and they're paying the price.
Yeah. Manu, let me quickly remind listeners of how Union have started the season, and then maybe that's a bit of context that is necessary. So, start the season with wins against Mainz and Darmstadt, as you would expect. They then lose to Leipzig, then lose to Wolfsburg, then lose to Hoffenheim, lose narrowly 1-0 to Heidenheim, then lose quite big to Dortmund and Stuttgart. If you kind of look at that list of fixtures, I think it's maybe fair to say, of those 8 games they've played at least, 5 teams pushing for top 6 this season. They've beaten 2 relegation candidates. They've lost to a promoted side, which is probably a real stinker. But you then flip that and look at the teams they've got between now and the winter break, which is Bremen away, Frankfurt at home, Leverkusen away, Augsburg at home, Bayern away, Gladbach at home, Bochum, and then Cologne. And, you're looking at 8 games there where rather than having, unlike the first 8 games where they had 2 games they were expected to win, they've now got 8 games and there's only maybe 2, maybe 3 teams there that you would, on paper, say are better than Union Berlin. So do you feel like if there's any hope for Fischer to turn things around, at least he maybe has a bit of kind of runway here to kind of try and, save their season of sorts?
Yeah, I think he does. I think that actually the next game against Werder Bremen could be a turning point already. Just a couple of things that come to mind as both of you are speaking. The XG is a big one, right? And I mean, as you pointed out, good teams outperform the XG. That's usually why they're good teams, right? And you pointed out Dortmund and Bayern as having better XGs as well than the actual goal scoring would suggest. So I think that is a really important point. And I think what Union Berlin were last year, they were an excellent team, and they were able to form Fischer was able to form out of the different pieces of misfits that he got a very coherent unit. And they added 11 new signings this summer, 11 new players, right? And some of them quite with a big profile. Robin Gosens comes to mind. Kevin Volland is another one. Brandon Aronson, Fofana was one with lots of promises that hasn't just clicked yet. That's a big turnover, and you're adding pieces here that maybe come in with a different mentality than the one that was there in the first place. You mentioned crosses. Robin Gosens is an excellent player. Last week we talked about the German national team and his lack of ability of defending, right, Stefan? That was a big topic. Well, if you sign Robin Gosens, you are getting an attack-minded wingback. That's who he is. He is Alphonso Davies light, right? Like, that's essentially the sort of player that you have. And that kind of points to me, like that kind of points out to me that the pieces that they added are excellent. And I think actually they went from being a team that is bigger than the sum of its parts to a team that's smaller than the sum of its parts. And that's, I think, a really big task for Urs Fischer for him as well, right? Now, because, and I asked this question when I was with Union Berlin last year, well, what are you going to do when you are successful? How are you going to conserve that success? Because getting there is easier than to stay there, right? And I think that's where they are at the moment. And I think that is a big part of why they are struggling, is this making the step from not just, oh yeah, we're getting better every year, better, Conference League, Europa League, Champions League. Well, what's the next step after that? Like, you're talking trophies. And so your board of directors goes out, Runert goes out and adds the pieces necessary for that to conserve that success. Well, guess what? It's really difficult to actually then conserve that success and to do it with the same kind of coaching staff that previously always kind of coached up, right? And I think that is a really, really, it's a really big challenge for Urs Fischer. It's a really big challenge for this club. But I think that, there is some hope on the horizon. I personally think that they're going to be just fine, but they might actually regress this year a little bit.
Yeah, what comes to mind here is actually Freiburg under Christian Streich, where sometimes they'll have a very kind of ropey transition season, but as he's proven over the years, is that they always end up ticking back upwards once the new players are embedded in, once they kind of all start singing from the same hymn sheet and know how to kind of play under him, then it all kind of reverts back to the mean. And I do kind of wonder if that's what will happen under Fischer. So
I just think the turnover was so big, Stefan, right? Like 11 new faces. Okay, I added Hugo Leiche as well, so make it 10. But that's a big turnover. That's a third. Like, in their cases, that's a third of your squad.
Yeah, well, a lot's changing in that club very quickly. We've talked a lot about they've signed just about as many people off the pitch this summer as they have on it. It's obviously a club with a lot of big plans off the pitch as well, in terms of the stadium and their infrastructure and their staffing as well. So yeah, a lot going on there right now. But let's turn to our final kind of lower half the table team we want to talk about today, which are Mainz, because Matt, you were there to take in their 3-1 defeat to Bayern, and as you wrote about in this week's Monday Bulletin, it was a defeat. It is a result that keeps Mainz bottom of the table again, but there is maybe some hope for them going forward.
I think there is, yeah. I was actually, I ended up changing my mind a little bit. I think going into the game, when I started looking into them, probably through my own ignorance, really, I must admit. I sort of looked, okay, they're looking at 12 games without a win here, stretching back to last season. They've lost some key players in recent years, and yeah, I wondered if maybe the time had come that the relegation could be on the cards. And but having looked into them a little bit, spoken to a few people, gone to the game, sampled like the atmosphere around the club, I actually think that things are a lot more optimistic than they would seem at first glance. Obviously, it was another defeat. Obviously, that run of winless games was extended to 12. Then again, it's Bayern Munich at home, and although they had beaten Bayern Munich in this fixture in the past 3 seasons, it remains a free hit. If you can get something, it's a bonus. If not, it's just whatever. Just see how you perform. And on the whole, I thought they actually performed relatively okay. There'll be frustrations on Mainz's part for some of the goals. Bo Svensson, the coach, was particularly frustrated at the way in which I think Leroy Sané won his challenge against Fernandes in centre mid in the build up to the first goal. It was a pretty weak effort from Fernandes, and Sané has he's shown a great deal more strength and determination to win that ball. And it's a really powerful run, feeds Coman. It's a fantastic finish. And then on also the second goal, it's 3 headers in a row which Mainz somehow conspire to lose in the 6-yard box. The first header, which comes in from the cross, and then I forget who that was from. And the second one's when the cutback from the byline from Goretzka, when that's a header that goes unchallenged, it's really poor form. And then to leave Harry Kane, of all people, also stood with no one marking him in the middle of the 6-yard box to nod it home. Really, really poor goal to concede. And it was a shame from Mainz's point of view, because they did actually create some decent chances. They did press high. They did win the ball well. They did try and expose some of the gaps, particularly in behind the fullback positions, which is often a slight Achilles heel that you can get Bayern with. With a little bit more luck, or maybe not luck, were it not for an outstanding save from Sven Ulreich from Lee's header in the first half, you're looking at 1-1, and that was just before Bayern made it 2, so that was quite unfortunate timing, but it's a fantastic save. He gets down and tips it onto the post. Similarly, in the second half, just moments before Leon Goretzka makes it 3-1, Stefan Bell, actually the centre-back, starts the move and finishes it, and it's on a plate for him on the edge of the box, with space to shoot, the whole goal at his mercy, and he puts it wide. Bayern go up the other end and score. And Mainz even there have themselves to blame
and
for
the ball went through Bell's leg.
That was also unfortunate. So a lot of things came together, and then even though the game was over by that point, and we'll get on to Brian Gruder, the young 19-year-old in a sec, but he had another fantastic game. He's definitely been a bright spot in recent weeks. At the weekend, it was a fantastic. He's only a kid. He looks quite slight, and yet he's managed to shrug off Kim as if he's not there. And then strike a great shot against the post. Really exciting player, and you can that was form that he continued from the 2-2 draw away Gladbach last week, when he doesn't just score one of the goals, a contender for goal of the season, a fantastic strike from the edge of the box. He also, I think a few minutes later, attempted to chip the goalkeeper from the from the halfway line, effectively. So a player with fantastic confidence, strength, skill, and he's come through Mainz's youth system. So a lot of positives around him. And I think based on the form, I think the results will they will come for Mainz. I think there's more there to be optimistic about than not. Next game is away at Bochum on Friday night. Already a bit of relegation, 6-pointer, but a game where they'll be hoping to pick up points. And it's also interesting to hear just sampling some of the opinions and the atmosphere around the club pre-match. Generally speaking, no one's overly worried, and I think there's a bit of an acceptance in Mainz and a realism that it's a small club from a small city. And despite some impressive finishes in recent years, particularly under Tuchel, and then more recently under Svensson, where they even qualified for Europe on one occasion. Despite all of that, if you look at the bigger picture, success to Mainz is being in the Bundesliga at all. Yeah. They're a well-run club, very family-orientated club, not just in the sense of bringing the production line of coaches from the youth system in terms of Klopp, Tuchel, Svensson, Martin Schmidt, all these sorts of characters who come and gone. Christian Heidel was sporting director for years, left to Schalke. Now he's also back at the club. It's a very down to earth club, and I think there's an acceptance of that, and that breeds a certain realism. And I think even financially speaking, obviously the fact remains that like I said, they're without a win, the bottom of the league, and they've got an awful lot. They've got a proper battle on their hands this season. However, if the worst was to happen and Mainz were to go down, I don't think that they would be in such financially dire straits as, say, Cologne, Schalke, Hertha, Hamburg, the likes, clubs with much bigger fan bases, much bigger financial commitments, bigger expectations. I think Mainz would be a lot better placed to regroup in the second division. But then again, I don't necessarily think it'll necessarily come to that anyway. Some impressive signings too. We've been impressed. It's not a new signing, but I'm impressed with Ajorc up front. I like the way he plays, holds the ball up really well, gets involved in build-up play. Impressed also with Anthony Cassie, the French left back, who scored a fantastic finish for his goal. There's some reasons to hope for Mainz despite a shocking start to the season.
They're a little bit like Freiburg that way, right? Like that, if Freiburg go down, it wouldn't be really the end of the world because of the way they've set themselves up financially and all that sort of thing. And the expectations would be that they would be really quickly back. I'm glad you mentioned Gruder there, Matt, because like there was also a really cool moment after the game where he exchanged jerseys with Thomas Müller, and then Müller kind of knighted him, right? Yeah. I think game knows game, I think is what
absolutely. At the end of the game, Thomas Müller's literally walking around the pitch in Gruder's shirt, which is
and then it was an Instagram
nice
post as well, where he praised him. So Gruder looks like a good one.
Really exciting player. One thing Mainz do they really do need to cut out these really, really daft defensive errors. Obviously, mentioned some of the ones where they shot themselves in the foot against Bayern. And
Bayern was there for the taking, because I think that the squad is really thin at the moment, right? They only had the 7 players on the bench, and like 3 of them were like, one of them was Bundesliga, so he doesn't count. Then there was 2 amateur players, and then there was a goalkeeper. So I mean, that's really thin. And Kimmich wasn't playing fit. I know, Stefan, you and I had a bit of a discussion about this because he didn't play for Germany, but then he played for Bayern. But I think he would have played in this game with one leg because the squad is so thin. And then they lost Goretzka as well, and he's going to be out for a few weeks as well now. I kind of feel like the way that they constructed the roster kind of makes them, they're kind of there for the taking right now. And if that one shot goes in and it's 2-2, I think Mainz gets something there.
given form in recent years as well. I mean, it wouldn't be, like I said, it wouldn't be the first time that Mainz would get something against Bayern. But I think Bayern certainly have a lot to thank for Leroy Sané in particular, who was once again really, really good, in fantastic form.
Yeah, I mean, if only Bayern had a midfielder, preferably Dutch, who had been sitting on the bench for the last 12 months.
They had one. What was his name again?
Yeah, exactly.
I forgot his name. Did they sell him like just before deadline day without a replacement?
Yeah, I think so.
What happened? Like, didn't they do the same with like a right back and a centre back?
Yeah. But, just maybe the last couple of minutes, just briefly kind of giving the Bayern fans something to chew on. They do have a very interesting tie in the Champions League this week, away to Galatasaray, which, as we all know, is a very kind of, intimidating place to go. Which, I mean, obviously Bayern in the Champions League in the group stages, they just kind of seem to go into autopilot and win these games. But we saw just a few weeks ago how much they struggled in Copenhagen with what was relatively a full-strength squad, I guess. So that'll be interesting to see how they do in that clash against Galatasaray. But the one I'm really looking forward to is the Dortmund match at the start of November, which, is maybe 2 or 3 games away, but it's not that far off. And, this is what always happens. We always get our hopes up ahead of these Der Klassikers, which I said in inverted commas.
I'll be at that game, Stefan.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I was watching this Bremen game, and I think Terzic basically said something after the game. He's like, "Look, we're not sexy, but we get results." And it'll be really interesting to see because got to give Dortmund credit. I know I said it's talking about Bayern, I'm talking about Dortmund here, but I will bring it back to Bayern by saying, the Dortmund are kind of very boring, but very kind of pragmatic right now, while this Bayern team, Manu, seem to be a little all over the place.
Yeah, but that's that's due to how they managed the squad in the summer, right? I mean, we've talked about this many times, and you have to. Joshua Kimmich goes all the way to the States sick, right? He's flying there sick, and then they bring him back sick, and they nurture him for this game, and you could tell. I don't care what people say, but he wasn't 100% fit for this game. That is due to the squad management in the summer, and the writing was on the wall for this ever since they decided to sell players before deadline day and not bring in replacements beforehand. And I think this team is vulnerable, and I'm really, really, really curious about the Klassiker. I know we always get our hopes up, but I think this is going to be a fascinating match because Dortmund, and I mentioned this on one of the threads this week, at what point do we say to this Dortmund side that played this boring football but gets results as being just an efficient machine, right? Yeah. At some point we have to maybe acknowledge that what Terzic is doing isn't sexy, but it works. It worked once again. And that could be a good recipe. I don't know. I mean, I think we will probably dive really deeply into this once the Klassiker has come and gone. Yeah. But I do think there's an interesting narrative developing, especially because these are not the 2 sexiest teams in German football, period. I mean, right now, that's Stuttgart and Leverkusen, right? Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we're probably going to have to talk about that on another episode because we are kind of come to the end of our time here. Before we go, Matt, we always like to kind of give you an opportunity to kind of punt your stuff. And, whether you're even still on social media right now, I don't know, but let us know what you're thinking before we wrap things up here.
It actually leads on quite well from what we were talking about with Mainz, because obviously for the rest of the season now they're going to be without Anwar El Ghazi. And that's, the reason for his absence was actually the reason why I was in Mainz predominantly, was to actually do a story on that whole situation. Obviously people aren't aware he's been suspended by Mainz, most likely for good, after posting on Instagram regarding the current conflict in the Middle East, a post which Mainz said was not compatible with the club's values, and they've decided to despite the fact that he'd actually made a good impression, I think sporting wise, in the past couple of weeks, linked up really well with Barkok in Mönchengladbach last week. He also won't be available for them because they've decided to let him go. So I was actually there, basically trying to get a bit of an idea of how these German clubs take what leads them to make these decisions like in the way they do, their stance on the current issues in the Middle East and why that's the case, and also what German fans and Mainz fans in particular think of that. And I think the fans that I spoke to, I did do my best to speak to as many as I could before the game, were quite unanimous in their support for the club's decision. I've tried my best to produce a piece which I think, regardless of the complexities and the sensitivities of the whole topic, and it is a really horrific and horrible topic at the moment, but I hope I've been able to produce a piece which at least explains where German fans and where German clubs, and I think maybe even more broadly German society is coming from when it comes to the stance on the current situation. So if anyone's interested in that, have a look. It's on my Twitter /X/Blue Sky. I'm on that now. I was saying to a mate, I actually thought I had to admit, I actually thought it was called Blue Ski. I didn't realise until I saw the clouds.
It's the biggest social media platform in Poland right now.
So if you're interested, have a look. And like I said, I've tried to do my best with a very, very difficult topic, I think.
Yeah, it's a absolutely great piece. You can check it out. It's on Deutsche Welle's website as well, if I'm not mistaken. We can find it from Matt. And that kind of wraps things up as ever. A big thank you to everyone who listens. We'll be back, Manu and I, with the bonus show and the Transfer Roundup show this week, as well as all the newsletters. Manu, I'll tee this one up for you, but until next time.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.
As a major research institution, Arizona State University offers the most online bachelor's degree programs. Along with world-class faculty and dedicated support, discover why ASU is ranked #1 in innovation for 9 consecutive years. Tap to learn more